An evacuation earlier September this year of this stadium because of a high-pressure gas leak. For perspective's sake, this site is about half the size of the site that's proposed for Bella Romero Academy where we just were. So this is 12 wells at Bella Romero. They're planning to drill 22. So without waiting any longer, I will invite Dr. Larry Moore to speak to us. He is a medical doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And thank you to 350 for organizing this today and inviting me to come and chat with you all a little bit. So, I'm Dr. Larry Moore. I live in Colorado Springs and have had an emergency medicine practice there for about 38 years. And I love the state of Colorado. And I have kids and I have grandkids, and that's what motivates me to be here today, is because I think that what I'm handing off to my grandchildren doesn't look anything like what my grandparents handed to me, and I'm sad about a lot of it, but I have a voice and we all have one, and I want to help make sure that we can mobilize our voices together. What I want to talk today about, though, is the health implications of fracking. And as I know them to be as a medical doctor, as I know them from my colleagues, and I know them from the research, some of which we've talked about already. So there really is a growing body of good scientific evidence, real facts, not fake facts, about fracking and health implications. And what's happened in the state of Colorado is that now fracking is moving into where people live, not people moving into where fracking is. And one of my colleagues on the bus with me just had this happen, that now there's a well going to be drilled very, very close to where he and his wife live without their implied or whatever consent. And that's how it is. So fracking is moving in on us now. And there are significant implications to our health that we want to be aware of. I certainly want you to be aware of. So there are all kinds of things that happen when a well is fracked. We've talked about a lot of them that stir up the air and that leak into the air things that are toxic for us. We've talked about the volatile organic compounds. And there's a list of 19 of those. 19 not only VOCs, but toxic chemicals that are in frac fluid. So fracking fluid by itself is an issue. I want to talk first of all about the air that happens around wells and what happens when we have leaks of air, of not only air but volatile organic compounds around well sites. But first to state this, there are 3 states that have banned fracking already, and in their wisdom I think we need to salute them. Maryland, New York, and Vermont banned fracking completely. There's a lot of wise people there, but there's many wise people here, so if we say to ourselves, what can we do? We can do a lot, and these people in these states have banned it. I realized that in Maryland they hadn't fracked yet, but they're not going to. So the will of the people has a lot to do with what happens. And there are now 4 countries around the world, so it's a global problem, not just here in Colorado. France, Germany, Bulgaria, and Scotland have banned in their entire countries fracking. We can do this. We can do this. We just need to have the will. And then there are 6 more countries that have a moratorium, so you can't do it now there. Doesn't mean it will be banned, but they've at least placed a hold on it. And those are the Czech Republic, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Denmark, and South Africa. And I say applause to those people who have the wisdom to do that. Because the reasoning is fracking is too unsafe for the reasonable public health of the citizenry, and I say that's true in Colorado too. And the peer-reviewed literature now has over 700 studies on the impacts of fracking, looking at the health impacts. And 80% of those 700 studies, so over 500 peer-reviewed studies, document risk to public health or actual harm to public health. I'm not making this up. You can go look at this. I have a handout that I've placed in your packets, and at the end of this I have a lot of references. So if you want to go, where's the science? I'll tell you, it's there. So let's talk about the specific health impacts. Air pollution has been significant, and it has been measured at a distance of up to 10 miles, 16 kilometers away from a given active well site. So when we were over at Bella Romero and you looked out in the field and it's 1,000 feet away, that's a funny distance. It's like there is no sense to the setback that occurs in Colorado. If 1,000 feet is the setback and 999 feet is dangerous, where did that come from? It's just a funny number. Throw a dart at the board. It's nonsensical because you can measure these substances up to 10 miles away from a pad site. The VOCs that comprise the most significant risk are 4, BTEX, BTEX, and those are benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. Those should stick in your brain because they're toxic substances to humans. They cause brain damage, they cause nervous system disorders, they cause cancer. They're definitely all on the list of cancer-causing chemicals, and they cause birth defects. And the people most sensitive to these chemicals, these VOCs, are children, infants, women who are pregnant, and older folks who have chronic illnesses and diseases. So right over at Bel Romero and right here we can see we're now exposing the most sensitive populations of our kindred to these substances. And most people aren't giving it a thought or aren't concerned about it or don't know who to tell, and they've got children. And those are who I'm concerned about. We need to be the voice for our children, absolutely. The EPA has even said, benzene is one of the ones that sticks in my brain the most. There is no safe level of exposure to benzene, period. No safe level. Which means that if somebody says, oh, it's a low level, you live 2 miles away, it's in the air, but don't worry, but how many years are you going to be exposed to it 24/7? That's significant. There's no way to say anything else about that other than benzene is a VOC. It's in what comes out of an active drill pad, and we all breathe it. And it's very, very dangerous. So I want to mention about 4 different studies because I want to give you some numbers. We've talked about some of those already, and you've asked some questions about them. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment did produce a study. It hasn't yet been peer-reviewed, but it's out there. It's readable. You can pick it up. You can go to their website and read about it. And what it showed was that there is an increased risk for neurologic problems, ear, nose, and throat symptoms, and reactive weight disease or asthma exacerbations with exposures to the multiple air pollutants from oil and gas well activity, period. No matter how close or how far away you live. The closer you live to an active well, the greater the incidence. And we're going to talk about Lisa McKenzie's work because that's what she found. She found that the closer you live to an active well, the greater incidence of significant health problems. 2016, Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health, and collaborating institutions analyzed medical records of 35,000 patients in Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania sits right on what? The Marcellus Shale. Huge amounts of fracking in the state of Pennsylvania, similar to what happened in Colorado. These 35,000 patients had a diagnosis on their chart of asthma. They ranged in age from 5 to 90 years. So this is a wide range of folks, kids and adults. And there was a statistically significant finding of a correlation between living nearer to active fracking operations and mild and severe asthma exacerbations. Can't be denied. The closer you live to an active well, if you have active reactive airway disease or asthma, the more likely you are to have an exacerbation of that illness. Studied mothers who were pregnant and giving birth. This was between 1996 and 2009. So those are the years. And they were mothers who lived within the highest density and nearest to fracked wells. And they were found to be twice as likely to have babies born with neural tube defects. That's CNS, brain and spinal cord defects. And there was a 30% increase in birthing mothers with congenital heart defects also, the same time frame, the same study. So the closer you live to an active well, if you're a pregnant mother, you have a 30% greater increased opportunity to have a child with a permanent lifelong congenital heart defect. And this was in comparison to mothers who lived greater than 10 miles from a fracked well. So the extension of this is incredible. It's linear. The closer you are, the worse it gets. Period. No discussion needed. The same school, a more recent study, showed that children and young adults diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia, a blood cancer, 4.3 times more likely to live in areas with the highest density of active fracked wells as compared to living greater than 10 miles away from a fracked well. Again, conclusive evidence that the closer you live to fracking, the more dangerous it is in terms of serious lifelong disabilities for children and for elders. And then in Pennsylvania, the University of Pennsylvania and Columbia University in 2015 showed an increase in cardiac and neurologic diagnoses requiring hospitalization, severe illnesses requiring people to be hospitalized in 2 Pennsylvania counties that had high levels of fracking activity. much like the one we're standing in right now. I call this a very high level of frack activity. And this is in comparison to a neighboring county in which fracking had been banned. So they had two counties identical in every other respect, one of which had fracking at high density, like here, one of which had none. And then, as has been said, 30 to 40% of the ozone that occurs along the Front Range is due to the release of VOCs from oil and gas production and from the nitrous oxide that's generated by the trucking activity, which is incredible when there's an active well pad present. Let me talk briefly about spills that occur of fracking fluid, because we talked about fracking fluid full of chemicals. I told you there are 29 chemicals in fracking fluid which either have reasonable suspicion or do have findings of causing cancer. And they include the BTEC ones that I talked about: formaldehyde, lead, salts, toxic heavy metals, arsenic, and radioactivity. And these all come back with the blowback from a well. So when do spills occur? There are about 2 times a day a spill in the state of Colorado, given the wells we have. Twice a day there's a spill. Maybe a tiny spill, may be a big spill. But the problem is the Oil and Gas Commission does not really monitor these wells, does not require reporting of every spill, and does nothing to talk about findings, ways to mitigate or to cut down the number of spills. So here's the statistics. In 2014, less than half of those spills were cleaned up within a 2-year period. 2 years. Half of those were still not cleared up. Let's keep going. So finally, I want to talk briefly about climate change. I firmly believe that climate change is real. I firmly believe that human activity has a lot to do with climate change. Putting more carbon in the air than ever before in humankind's history has a lot to do with the fact that we're now above 350 parts per million, well over 400. And it's a potent greenhouse gas. But what about methane? We've talked about natural gas. It's methane. When it's released in the atmosphere over a 20-year period, as it persists in the atmosphere, it does degrade into carbon compounds, but it's 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas over that 20-year time frame. So it's significant. We know that wells will leak. We talked briefly about it. And here are the numbers. Sorry about that. 5% leak immediately. That's already been said. 5%. 1 out of 20 leak right away. After 15 years, 50%. 50. Half of wells leak. And after 30 years, 60%. 60% leak. Significant contribution, methane going right into the atmosphere. And then how much of the methane that's actually produced goes into the atmosphere? Because we know that there's some that comes out of storage, some that comes out of pipelines, some that comes out during production. The early estimates that about 1.2% of the methane produced over the lifetime of a well leaked into the atmosphere, and that was found to be really low. In 2016, so 1 year ago, the EPA revised upwards its estimate of leakage to 9.3% over the lifetime of a well will leak out. And at Cornell University, researchers in 2016, even before that, added the leakage at the point of extraction to come up with a figure of 12%. We simply don't know, but we know that some leaks, and if 10% of what's produced over the lifetime of a well leaks out into the atmosphere, we've just done ourselves additional harm by putting that greenhouse gas out into the atmosphere. Sure. So I think I'm really to the end of the points I wanted to discuss. Finally, I want to say that I'm here today at the behest of Physicians for Social Responsibility. It's an organization which I believe in deeply, which I've been a member of for some time. And Physicians for Social Responsibility is a nationwide organization of physicians and other healthcare providers that works to eliminate toxins in the environment, eliminate nuclear weapons, and reduce global warming. And that's part of the emphasis I have today. Thanks a lot. I'd like to take questions.
Statistics. Anthony Ingraffia, PhD in rock fracturing, said that the rest of those, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So they're all going to leak. All of it. Every single one.
Yeah, good point. For those of you who can't hear, all of the wells are going to leak sometime. That's the takeaway from that. And I told you the numbers, they're significant even if it's only 60%. It's a lot.
And the other things that happen to folks within the radius of the wells, are most of those the same folks who are not politically empowered? Or does it also happen with, when the well is near a more affluent white neighborhood?
Excuse me for the feedback. It really, the question is, do women who birth babies that have birth defects that live near wells, are they part of a broad spectrum of socioeconomic status, or are they underprivileged? And I want to say it's across the whole spectrum, because don't have a voice, don't feel empowered, you can't believe they don't care. I think all mothers care about their unborn children. But it's a broad spectrum of people that are certainly affected by this. Ethylbenzene. And, what's what I said?
Xylene.
Yeah, xylene, X-Y-L-E-N-E, xylene.
And physical health impacts from things like noise, not being able to sleep. A lot of the complaints that we're seeing from places like Erie, especially on the COGCC website, have to do with, not being able to sleep, with nausea. Are those things that are considered to be significant health impacts that would, be advised against being in neighborhoods?
There are absolutely significant health impacts. When you can't sleep at night, you know how the rest of your day goes the next day, not well. So there's all kinds of trucking activity when an active well is being fracked. 5 million gallons of water generally comes in on the back of a lot of trucks, and it's over a several day, up to 60-day period of time. Every day, 24/7, trucks are coming by. They're not only generating a lot of noise, they're generating a lot of particulate matter. And I didn't even talk about particulates in the atmosphere, but particulates are particularly harmful to people with reactive airway disease, asthma, and children. And now they're going to be outside in the yard playing, and the road is right over there, and you got how many trucks? 4 trucks an hour. That's what the average is. 4 trucks an hour every day, 24/7, for about 50 days during an active frack. That's one thing, absolutely. And yes, people will talk about they are able to smell it in the air, or they have headaches, or they have nosebleeds. Those are real physical complaints, and I believe that the closer you live to an active well, the more that happens. It's really difficult to talk about causality. Does A cause B? But we can talk about associations, and the associations are very clear. And it's very clear that the closer you live to an active well, the more likely you are to have any of these symptoms or issues that I've really just discussed.
Can I add a comment?
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't see any other
Yeah, I was just going to say that when we brought up the issue of smell and nausea and stuff like that in relation to, fracking in Erie, one of the members of the COGCC, I believe, stated that they couldn't regulate if somebody wore, heavy perfume into an office or something like that and it caused nausea. But what would you say to that, in terms of like when you're seeing fast people with these similar symptoms, is that something that should be regulated? Can smells be regulated? Do you know?
I really doubt that smells can be regulated. I have no idea. All I can tell you is that those are real symptoms. People have real experiences. They're real things. I can also tell you that having stood before the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, they are not our friends. They're the friends of the oil and gas industry, and we need to be down there every meeting talking with those people about what we see as the reality in our own lives related to oil and gas activity.